Hey everyone, welcome to The Water Voice. I'm Greg.
And I'm Kevin, and we look forward to talking with you about all things water.
And startups.
And much more.
Let's go. Welcome everyone to The Water Voice. Today we have a special guest. This is someone that I respect a lot. I look up to a lot, Michael Christian. I don't even know how to begin to introduce you. I mean, you're an inventor, you're a designer, you've co-founded a company or companies, you've worked in senior management, but our conversations typically go a lot deeper than just business and you know, all things startup. I would consider you somewhat of a philosopher in a sense. But who is Michael Christian?
Wow. Uh, Probably all the things that you said, but right now, as I'm really not part of any organization, I don't have a position of influence or authority. I'm simply one person who has some views, and I act on them by being involved with you and your project because it's a green project, and with the other part of that project. And at my time in life, uh, I have figured out what the purpose of life is. It's really simple. It's helping other people, period. If there's any confusion about that, it isn't for me. I can't see any other thing to do. So that's what I'm here to do. I'm using my experience, my ability to think, write, and research, talk, communicate to further those types of things along. And of course, right now we're involved in a project that has the potential to reduce 8% of the carbon dioxide from going into the air. That would be a huge thing to do.
Yeah, it is amazing, and you know, you say that, and you live that. That's something that emanates from you, is your willingness and your passion to help other people. And I want to jump right into this because this is something that together we're working on now. Aquapore.
Yeah.
You know, we have technology that solves a couple issues, one being obviously the water issue, but the underlying technology is a means to decarbonize one of the most CO2 intensive industries in the world, which is cement production. This is something that you have totally jumped into and researched, and you understand really well. What got you into this? Besides us just meeting, what I guess attracted you to wanting to understand everything that you could about this problem?
Well, it's been a long-term interest from the earlier days in environmental consideration where carrying capacity was a real big issue, and which has to do with population. Carrying capacity at the time I was involved was going kind of county by county and state by state, saying how many people can we have in our city and our county with the resources, water and power and all that are available to us. And one of the counties where I worked on that with, there was a limit set, and some of the towns actually froze their population for a while.
Interesting.
And then the development money started rolling in and influencing city planners, and that ended after a while. And now these little towns are just chock full of houses, and the power supply, the water supply, they're all suffering because you can't carry that many people. There's a limit. We can't have 27 billion people on the planet. It won't work.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, on that basis, you are writing a white paper that we've talked about, and I can't wait until it's finished and I'm able to read the whole thing. If you're okay with this, I'd like to talk about the white paper and some of your thinking that's gone
Sure.
into this. And I want to start off immediately with an excerpt that you recently read to me that I thought was pretty powerful, and it was profound. I think you titled it "An Unpayable Debt."
Yes.
Do you mind reading that again?
No, I don't. The title of this paper is, well, the purpose of the paper was to see if we could determine what would be a good cost to pay people for not emitting a metric ton, which is about 4,400 pounds of carbon into the air, because there's 34 billion tons being emitted annually all over the world. And we wanted to come up with what is the damage that's really created. And so one of the first things I did was analyze the cost to humans. And this paragraph is titled "An Unpayable Debt." One of the costs of air pollution rarely addressed is the effect on human lives. Around 8 million people die from factors presented by air pollution annually. Though human life is seldom given a monetary value, the workers' compensation system in the United States pays an average of $1.3 million per worker death, giving us a dollar value on human life based on 2021 data. The cost of human life lost from air pollution annually is approximately $10.5 trillion. The grief caused by their death is incalculable. Worth mentioning are the millions who suffer from the non-fatal effects of air pollution. We are looking at an annual death toll and cost. It is best to look at an accumulative figure for an estimate of untimely deaths related to air pollution. For example, let's assume 100 million deaths over the last 20 years, and the average cost of life is $1 million. The tragic cost of loss would be $100 trillion, and this can never be paid back. The old utilitarian ethic was the greatest good for the greatest number. We seem to be reversing that to the greatest good for the few.
Wow. That that hits it on the head. It's pretty hard to argue with a number like that. You put
Yeah.
an actual number on human life. What do you hope to accomplish with the white paper?
Um, there, I have another section that might answer that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I read that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is the epilogue in the paper.
Okay.
Okay. Are we saying it is not possible to change the course of events leading to ever greater environmental catastrophes and life loss? Have we explored and tried different kinds of energy sources, building materials, and food sources? Are we done and finished with the climate goals of getting our CO2 emissions down to zero? Is it human limitations, physical limitations, limitation from lack of will or intent, love of status quo so much unwilling to change one's favored part in it, lack of compassion for other people and the life that supports? Do we throw up our hands and say the catastrophes are inevitable, so crank up the fossil fuels, overfish the fisheries, cut all the trees, use more and more cement to build ever-growing urban landscape? Make sure the favored have a shelter from the global storm and resources to support their merest whim? Let our changes to the environment take their course, keep the population growing, let war and other catastrophes thin out the population that can no longer be supported by the ecosystem. We can do nothing to improve our condition. No possible improvements are we willing to make. If that is so, the best disaster movies will be outside our doors and windows and 24-hour TV coverage talking of the tragedies and deaths and heroics of a few risking their lives to save others. There is a clear path to a better world. Reduce carbon emissions from 34 gigatons a year to zero. Allow the global system to adjust, modify and replace existing sources of carbon, change our consumption and manufacturing habits, ask ourselves why the suffering of others means nothing to us. Are we willing to consider the agony of those ailing from the ills of pollution? Can we look away not to see the last moments of a person's life who is dying from the deleterious effects in the environment they depend on to live? That's as far as I've gotten on that section.
That's really good. So, and you answered the question. It gets back to, I think what you started with was, your mission to help others and shining a light on this huge issue that there's been, there's attention now given to obviously climate change and, this issue of CO2 emissions. But now, just like and there's been markets that have popped up from this carbon markets, and there's a lot of there's been greenwashing. There's some funny accounting that goes on. You have also researched very thoroughly into some of these carbon exchanges and registries.
Mhm.
What in general have you found from doing that? Are we getting to the point where there's going to be a fixed market for carbon abatement? And how soon do you think something like that could happen?
That is the goal, is to get to that, that kind of a figure. You know, the initial figure that I came up from this paper was I took the $7 trillion that the International Monetary Fund says that energy industry gets a year and discounts to produce their electricity. And then I added 11 trillion dollars to that and divided it by 34 billion tons, and I came up with $500 per ton. And that's not counting all the other factors, because that's really hard for me to quantify at this time. Like 69% of the wildlife since 1970 has gone. Uh,
Nuts.
that's pretty that's pretty priceless. And how do we do that? We have coastlines that are already swallowing up some of the edges of some countries and islands. Um, the I think one of the things I get mostly frustrated with is, one, in order to maintain vested interest, there's people that are saying that the science of this is baloney. And it's like, it's science. That's what we depend upon. It's what you depend upon when you go to your dentist or your doctor or anything else, or you drive across a bridge. You hope that science had that right.
Right.
And so then to say that there's no science for this, it's uh, since the 1950s, when Mr. Keeling started measuring carbon dioxide in Southern California for his doctorate, I believe it was. He was in Pasadena, and every time he measured it around Pasadena, it was a different number. So he said, "Boy, I've got to figure this out." And so then he tried someplace else. I think it was Santa Barbara, and it was a little more consistent. He actually saw the breath of the day, what happened at night with our carbon dioxide and what happened in the day. And then finally, he and some people said we need to put it in a good place. And so they ended up in Hawaii on the top of Mauna Loa, and they put the very first global measuring device for carbon.
Wow.
And it's been an excellent continuous monitoring, and has given the patterns of what carbon dioxide does. I think Mauna Loa is over 10,000 feet, and so it's pretty clear up there. So that figure doesn't vary, except with the natural cycles of, there's a cycle between spring and fall, and there's cycles between day and night.
Interesting.
And so that has resulted in something we call the Keeling curve, which shows when industrial activities began, the amount of carbon for tens of millions of years was about 280 parts per million. And now we've measured up to 417 parts per million. And the curve that goes up from the industrial age up to now is really a sharp rise. And we go back millions of years, like through the deep core of the Antarctic ice sheets. It gives you a year by year blow. What was the carbon dioxide? It's like reading tree rings. Um, and it shows what the carbon dioxide was. It's like very stable, 280 million plus or minus some until the industrial age. And now we're at 417, and we're feeling the results.
Yeah.
One of the most important theories in science that seems to be hard to understand, I'm not sure quite why, is system. You know, a system is simply whatever you want to look at as the system. You have an input to it, like and then you have an output, and you do something in between, like here's life in between. We input all these things and output all these things, but it has a feedback loop in it. It changes from that loop, and what goes out, the process, and changes. And so a system, it's a bit more complex, because to look at the whole thing, which I wish we would do, the ocean, 50% of the ocean rise is not from melting or anything. It's from the expansion of water due to the increased heat that the ocean has.
Interesting.
And so there's like these little subtleties all over that lead to a much more rapid change than we might expect.
Yeah. You know, There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to go back to sort of the carbon market and how the most impactful change can happen, and it's gonna, I think, happen slowly. But the why do you think it's taken? Well, this is a rhetorical question. You and I know why it's taken so long. Corporate profits over, this is something you and I have talked about, over the last 20 years have been what?
$38 trillion.
38 trillion
That's in
dollars.
just the United States, not
Just,
the rest of the world.
just in the United States, and that's been a lot. That's heavy industry. That's obviously the tech industry,
Yeah,
but that's a lot of money, and that's we're talking about industries that have very heavy or high carbon footprints, and
right.
so they're very entrenched. Um, and I'm wandering now, but I want to get to the greenwashing that we're seeing, and let's just call it out because there's a lot of this that's happening, and we've seen this specific. I mean, it's happening here, but also in the EU, where the cement industry, the steel industry, huge heavy industries are that have large carbon footprints, are almost getting kickbacks or like some relief from the EU, from the government. So nothing is really being done. They're not hitting these targets, and yet they're getting credit for hitting those targets. Can you talk more about that?
Well, you asked earlier what the carbon market is, and it is in really disarray. I was reading a headline in a newsletter today that says the natural carbon sinks that are part of the carbon market, like people get about so much per ton from a forest uh, for the carbon that's taken in by the trees. But the headline read that all the natural carbon are just reducing in value and more value and more value. It's like that needs to go the other way. I think that even if we did $500 a ton to reward those that don't emit or that can counter it in some significant way, would be a good. We need to incentivize uh, somebody besides those that produce it. We've incentivized the people that produce it very well. We need to incentivize that don't produce it, or that if we end up with a cement that doesn't emit any carbon, and you can say, well, there's eight no, excuse me, yeah, it's 8%. What am I thinking? 400 million tons for
Yeah,
the cement industry.
that
Excuse me.
no, I follow, and you put it so simply there. That's, I guess, the problem that I'm having with all of this is there's a big money, and now I'm talking more on the private side, and my lens is on venture capital that is heavily financed, and I think it's with the best of intentions. They're heavily financing some of these carbon capture and storage technologies,
Yeah.
which, by the way, have an extremely high water footprint. They have other issues with these technologies, and yet there are technologies that simply don't. They could be alternative. We'll talk about concrete, an alternative type of concrete that doesn't produce any CO2 in the process, that aren't even being looked at. So it's almost like abatement or reduction is not even being looked at. Why do you think that is?
Uh, I think that we have so much more momentum going with it we do, and so much invested in things as they are. And I've watched vested interest over the years. They don't seem to have any problem in proselytizing, propagandizing, and having disinformation, so that nobody looks at them with any particular scrutiny or holds them accountable for all that money they make, without having, say, take that 38 trillion and just take a third of it and put it into, let's change our process.
Yep.
Let's not do that. And also, why don't we remediate some things we can't change? We're not doing that. We're saying that greed is good, and that making the money for the individual is more important than anything else. Um, our country has evolved quite a bit in this direction, where commerce is king. And one of the things that I'll read one paragraph here that I name it. Okay.
Sure.
What business does well is to deal with the physical world and modify it to fit goals. What government does well is to implement visionary laws and practices to reach goals no single player can do. Meld business savvy with government global oversight, and we can tack in the direction we need to go and pull away from the direction of negative and dire consequences to one of improving conditions, less suffering, less death, and less loss. So I think we can take the two things that they do well. You know, business knows how to, we rely on business to interface with the natural world to give us our food and our lumber and our concrete and all that.
Yep.
And government should be the oversight that says, okay, with all that, we have national goals, and
Yep.
this is what our national goals are. And they can do that. And they can do that with cap and trade. They can do that with other incentives. They're already doing some carbon tax relief
Yep.
for carbon, and they can go more in that direction.
I
And
100% agree.
and you talked about carbon capture. I looked at that when it first came out. It looked very interesting. One of the significant things I don't see is they never mention what their carbon footprint is, because you said they use water, they use electricity. And one Australian mathematician that I read, and I'm not too sure about all of it, he says it's roughly equal the energy that it takes to trap the carbon than it did to the same energy that it caused to produce it.
Yeah.
And I'm skeptical that you can take our 70 miles of atmosphere or whatever it is that has carbon dioxide mixed in there and put it all through machines and suck it out of there. I'm very skeptical of that. And then there's the thing, what are you going to do with it?
You're right.
You know, it was tried in Australia. They were going to shove this stuff down in between some shale plates or whatever, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I'm a little skeptical that that is going to do anything. It's very clear to me that the way to do this is to stop emitting, period.
Yep.
Everything in between is, oh, I did something good. No, you didn't. You're just saying you did.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think that's where it's going to get to. I do see, and I'm reading more about, you know, reduction being looked at, carbon reduction from, you know, existing processes that before were extremely intensive, CO2 intensive. And then I'm reading a lot more about climate adaptation. For us at Aquapore, that's a big deal because I think that's one of the main things our technology can provide is, listen, we're going to hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, I believe. The number the UN threw out is suddenly we're in this dire situation. I think we're going to blow past it. And so now it's about preparing our cities and communities to be more resilient for these huge, you know, these extreme weather events that come along. I'm veering off, but that's sort of, to me, that's progress. We're reading more about adaptation and sort of these reduction measures being looked at. So going back to this, it dawned on me a quote Charlie Munger said, and I'll probably butcher the quote, although it's something to the tune of, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome."
Yep.
And so in California, you know, they sort of had this cap and trade system where, was it a $5,000 a ton tax
Yep.
on fossil fuels?
It was on the automobile industry.
Okay. And that's
So it was called the ZEV program, the Zero Emission Vehicle Program, and I think 11 other states or so joined in on that to do the $5,000 carbon tax, and it worked. Tesla got a lot of money from that, but they also found there's an increase in electric vehicles and going on in California, a sharp increase, almost to the point where it wasn't even worth them having to pay Tesla for their carbon credit anymore. Because there's a lot of small engines and small things that you can make electric. I had to buy some electric things here when all our forest fires were here and we couldn't even start a machine.
yeah.
I got an electric blower, an electric chainsaw, and all that kind of stuff. So those things really count too.
Yep. Well, let's talk about that. So, you know, in the West here and in even in Spokane, we've had really dry summers the last, I don't know, several summers, and it seems like every late July, you know, into August, it becomes smoke season here. So wildfires have become a problem in the American West, and so the climate's changing. But I still talk to people, believe it or not, there are people that deny um, that the climate's changing, or it's the old the climate's always been changing. It's this is just another cycle in the evolution of the world. And what we talked, you and I, about this, the Kubler-Ross theory. Can you walk me through that and our listeners through that, and tell us what stage you think we're at right now?
Sure. This brilliant, a brilliant lady. I think it's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I hope that's the right name. But she came up with these 5 stages of grief when people experience loss, especially death of a person that they love. And that the first stage was denial. Oh, it didn't happen. Are you telling me the truth? I need to see it for myself. That kind of stuff. Where you can't believe that it happened yet. I haven't seen the body. Whatever it takes. And so that's that stage, denial. And of course, a lot of people are in that about climate change. You're talking about the death of a lot of things on this planet, life, people, changes in the habitat. That's really sad. Just if you want to talk about the 69% of the wildlife that's died since 1970, that's really sad.
Yeah.
The 2 best moments of my day so far are watching a hummingbird come on my hummingbird. I'm sitting on a stone wall outside and watching a hummingbird come to my feeder because there's a few that stay in the winter. And I get to see its crisp little profile against the blue sky, and it just makes my day.
Yeah.
And then a while later, I was looking across the valley and I saw the profile of a deer on the top of a hill, and my heart just said, "Wow, I love that."
Yeah.
So, um, denial, it's really important. It backs off the pain of loss for a while. It's just a brute force way to back off the pain of, oh my gosh, my heart is broken. No, it isn't.
Right.
Okay. And then the next one is anger at the yeah, I lost, and boy, I'm angry. And who did that? Was it the way they ate? Did they not eat enough bacon in the morning, or whatever it
Right.
happens to be?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And so there's that anger. That's natural. The root of anger is always sadness. Anger doesn't come out by itself. It comes on top of sadness about something.
Yeah.
And after that, there's the bartering phase, which and I mean, now we've seen the angry voices of climate denial. So that stage is well covered still. And then in bartering is the next one. Did it really happen? Did it not? If this, if that, on and on. You barter. And we're definitely in the bartering stage, especially with the climate, the carbon capture, because it's like, oh, if I do this, I have permission to do anything I want now because we can all make it up by capturing this carbon. So the bartering phase, we're in that, and I can see it in the carbon markets because they are all over the place.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you had the zero emission vehicle program charging $5,000 a metric ton for carbon. It's very hard to see anything going over 20, 10 to $40 in that range. And they're debating it down. And the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement seems to be the one that's really being activated right now, which is it's a part of the Paris Agreement says each country can barter and trade with another country. And then you're out of the you're into kind of almost a private realm of saying, well, I do this and you do that. And what we need are carbon credits that are based upon intensely uh, um, unbiased monitoring
Yep.
and open to the public to see what the monitoring is of the process, including monitoring what does a tree do. As you mentioned, the forest fires, I read an article the other day that said that I think California lost 3 million acres of its carbon buffer. They're considering the forest to be a carbon buffer. And so this is happening all over the world. This stuff is dying and burning up. And by the way, it adds a lot of carbon into the atmosphere when it burns, and it
Yep.
can no longer absorb carbon
Absorb
because
it.
it's not alive.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I'm interested. I want to talk more about. Did this come from the recent COP meeting? COP 20. What was it?
Yeah, I forget the number of it. Uh,
27.
I think it might have.
So
It's been there for a while, but I've seen it emerge as it's more visible that that's happening.
Yeah. So if a heavy CO2 emitting country, say China, wants to barter or negotiate with another country, they could go to, pick a country that where a huge swath of the Amazon encompasses the country. How would that work? So they go and
They would somehow determine what the value per ton of the carbon absorption is, and then they would uh, pay that country those credits.
got it.
Costa Rica, interesting country. They did away with their military some years ago and said we're going to put that money to the public good. I like that all by itself.
Yeah.
But they recently received a check for $196 million for their carbon credits because they have been reforesting all these areas that were not forested, had been forested before. So they're growing greener all the time.
Interesting. Yeah. Part of that could be there is some good that could come from that. Because maybe, well, this maybe for a longer conversation, but there have to be countries that are still developing that, they have these carbon reducing assets, if you will, or carbon
Right?
absorbing assets that they could get paid for those assets.
Yes.
So maybe there's some good to come from that. But that also seems like a way to just abdicate responsibility for your huge polluter.
Yep. There's the trip.
Yeah.
So the last two stages of that cycle of the denial, anger, bartering, the next one is depression. I'm sure a lot of us have felt some depression of the seeming futility to get society changed enough to make a difference. And then the place you have to get at the end is acceptance. And acceptance is a tricky thing. Acceptance doesn't mean I like something or anything else. It means I finally accept the information about what's happening, that yes, 8 million people are dying a year. That's an incalculable loss to people. Yes, this is the damage that's coming from the rising oceans. This is the damage that's coming from the acid rain and from the carbonic acid that's in the ocean that didn't used to be there to this extent. Um, Acceptance means accepting it all. Yes, the glaciers are retreating. Everybody can see it. There's endless films on YouTube now about watching glaciers, giant calving, where they calve off and ice falls off into the ocean because it's spectacular. But what it is, it's a loss of that fresh water.
Yep.
And then that goes into the ocean, and that is countering the salt water in the Atlantic conveyor, which brings warm air from the equator up along the west coast of um, Europe and the east coast of the United States, and gives us balmy little southern place. And England has good. Once that's gone, there's no longer that warm water warming up these countries, and that I can't even calculate what that's going to cost in lives and people in industry. Um, I wouldn't know how to calculate it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all obviously very interconnected. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing extreme weather events that now they don't even make the news really. They're just in communities throughout the US, even where you get these very flashy rain events. You have all this urban flooding. People are displaced, and it's always the folks that are in the low-lying areas, which
Right?
for other reasons, and even it goes back decades to the way cities were set up with redlining and all these things. They're typically lower income neighborhoods that get the brunt of these extreme weather events. But nonetheless, I mean, this is something that's happening frequently, and it just doesn't even it doesn't make the mainstream news unless it's a big, huge categorical hurricane. But these events are happening all over the place.
Yes, they are.
So I want to get back to water for a second. So we just
Sure.
kind of hit on that. We've talked about carbon capture, and I read something the other day that said, carbon capture at certain plants increases water usage by up to 200%. And so there are, as we try to tackle this problem, there are other issues that maybe, people aren't thinking about. And this strain on water is one of them that we think about all the time at Aquapore. Can you talk about your thinking or your theory behind, and let's talk just about water, centralized water infrastructure and systems and decentralized water infrastructure, and what you think is the better route as we move into the future is how we build out sort of these systems.
Well, let me think about that. Let's see. Uh, Philosophically, I prefer distributed systems rather than centralized systems. In human society, centralized systems seem to densify, intensify uh, wealth and power for a few individuals. And after a while, that most of them don't seem to have the greatest good for the greatest number in mind. They have mostly their vested interest in mind. I got to keep it going the way it is. I can't change anything about it because I've got my power and my money and all that, and my position in society because of how we're doing this. And so that centralized part just I think is a flawed anyway. And then it ends up with an authoritarian organization, which I don't particularly care for either. I think authoritarianism, authoritarian people hate science. They hate data because it will counter what they want to think on a given day. But I'm getting off on a tangent. So centralized stuff like that is something that I think we can get away from. Distributed water is naturally distributed through branching systems and pooling, right? It falls in the mountains and it carves out by erosion these branching systems that distribute it widely as it moves to the ocean. And I think following that model where you put some way of reclaiming the water where it falls and where it comes down, and that it's available to the local people in the villages or small towns where it comes down to, by something like the Aquapore porous concrete, because it's a non-mechanical passive system. It sits there and it does its one thing. It takes some of the impurities and sediments out of the water and it puts it in a cistern beneath it, and then that cistern would be available for pumping into central supply so that the community could take from it, or it will replenish the aquifer beneath it. So the distributed part in relation to Aquapore to me is, I think it's pretty clear that it goes into sidewalks, roadways, parking lots, where it can take in rain, store it, and then if people need it, they use it. Otherwise, it replenishes the aquifer.
Yep.
He said Aquapore.
Yep.
Oh no, I got caught.
That's perfect. That's why we are Aquapore,
I got it.
returning water to the aquifer through very small
Yes.
pores in our material.
Right.
I agree, and I know I maybe caught you off guard with that question. It was totally off topic from what we were just
Yeah.
talking about, but I really do think they're interconnected, and I think the same goes for energy systems, decentralizing energy.
Yeah.
I like what you have to say about centralized systems accrue at the top and only at the top. It seems like.
Right.
Although, we do rely on centralized water infrastructure for the most part now. We're very lucky in Spokane, but you get into other areas and regions, even in the United States, where there are some communities that have either run out of water, they're on the verge of running out of water. You have the Flint, Michigan catastrophe.
Yep.
So I think for all those reasons, I'm 100% with you. I think we need to look at a more distributed future when it comes to some of these critical resources like water and energy, and even food for that matter.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna flip flop and go back. I knew I had something on my mind that you talked about, and it had to do with the carbon market again. Monitoring. What is your sense of how carbon and CO2 emissions are monitored today?
Let's see. My sense is that
Flimsy.
there are methods that if people were to embrace them, like right now, the gold standard, which is the one that the World Wildlife Fund came up with over 20 years ago, is pretty strict. And I think that you'd be safe by buying carbon credits from people that earn them through the gold standard. And there's others that are close by, like Porsche and Vera. But the gold standard does have a pretty good technique for determining and verifying a carbon credit, but it's a lot of work to go through. It takes a little bit of money to go through that process and time and energy. Um, the the real problem has been people on this. The first carbon trading happened from a country in South America. I don't know how, a few decades ago, where they planted. There was an American company going in there, and they offset what they were doing by the forests in this one place, and that was the beginning of the carbon market. But what happened is that people started cheating on that as soon as they could. Okay, these are kind of mythical. I can make up my own. I can charge anything I want for them or whatever, or I can claim that I don't. And so there is a tremendous amount of distrust, even still, for what's the definition and what do you back up your carbon credit with. Uh, uh, we are working on a solution, you and I and some other people, that when we get going, we're going to establish a really good independent monitoring system for especially manufacturing concerns, because that's where our histories are.
Yep.
And so the monitoring is still, there's so much doubt about it. And there's phony people that come along and say, I'll do your carbon credits and I'm going to form an organization full of really neat people that we pay a lot of money for not doing anything.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
but anyway, it hasn't achieved the discipline it needs to, and the acceptance of that disciplined way to do this, the scientific way, the way technical way, the way that says, yeah, we're really going to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we don't want you to know what we're doing. Well, you're putting stuff into what I call the commons, which is everybody's atmosphere. It's not any one person's, it's everybody's ocean and water. We only have one ocean in this world. We just have different names for parts of it. And our land. That isn't, I don't care whether people think they own it. They need to be stewards of that land, period, while they have some control over it. So those are all shared things. And to think that you can just pour toxic substances into this, I mean, our biggest threat right now in the oceans is our loss of coral reefs, which is this immensely complex, wonderful ecosystem that has supported so much life and still does, and it's beautiful. Besides that, the life that it supports. So where was I going here?
No,
I'm getting carried away with myself.
You're going everywhere, which I love. And you talk about coral reefs. I know a guy that's working on a technology that thinks he can heal them.
That'd be great.
You know him well. And I think he has at least the precepts of a technology that can do that. And believe it or not, it's a concrete type technology.
Sure.
You know, it's interesting. And I don't tweet. I'm not like a Twitter guy, but I did the other day. I had to go out and tweet this because there's this semi-famous venture capitalist, billionaire guy, and he's got some good thoughts, and I appreciate him, some of the things he has to say. But his comment a year and a half or 2 years ago was that the first trillionaire is going to come from climate change. It's going to be someone that's, solving some of these climate issues. And he thinks it's going to be through the energy transition. But I went on and I had to tweet that the first trillionaire is going to come from climate change, but it's going to be the industrialist, the guy that goes, gets his hands dirty, figures out how to turn all this waste that we have created over decades and decades and decades, turns it into useful product that can deliver clean water. It will have an energy component. Obviously, in its process, keeps greenhouse gases from going off in the atmosphere, and maybe even creates clean food or food abundance. And I truly believe that. And I actually think we know the guy that is, and whether it's him or not, that type of thinking and that type of technology development is what's going to get us there. And the person that I'm talking about is someone that looks at the world from the lens of all of this is raw material that has just been wasted, but it's not waste.
Right.
And I don't know. I just that's something I've been thinking a lot about this week. Is I feel like the people, the powers that be, and the people that have all the money that are trying to solve these issues, they're missing a huge blind spot, and it is turning waste into useful product and doing it in a way that not only closes the loop, but doesn't create any deleterious effects when you make the material.
I hear you.
So that's my little rant.
No, I would imagine that would be the next one to make that kind of money and hopefully do the right things with it and continue. If that happens, then to continue modeling that way of thinking for anybody else in the world that wants it and to help them achieve it.
Absolutely. Yep. That's yeah, that's where money can be a force of good, obviously.
Yeah, money is a neutral thing
Yeah.
all by itself. It's what people do with it, and they use it to amplify
Who they are.
bad thinking and bad habits.
Yep. I would tend to agree with that. So what has you most excited these days?
Oh, every day is I love every moment of my life. Everything from my lovely wife to my little old house on a hill where I have a view to my little plastic printing devices here that I can come up with ideas and make a 3D prototype out of them. Having people like you to talk to on an ongoing basis because you're a very kind and compassionate, smart individual. And you're a good conversationalist, and I enjoy that. So you're one of the things I enjoy.
Thanks. The
So
feeling's definitely mutual. Yep.
Greg Johnson has a good core. That's what I'm going to tell you.
Thank you.
And so I like to write and I like to draw. And that's what, tens of thousands of drawing, because the drawing board has always been my laboratory for my thought. Words are linear and they're not so easy to capture a concept with. I can do much better with a drawing or a visualization to understand something as a whole.
Yeah.
And I do that time and time again. That is my laboratory, is a drawing board.
Yeah. Um, you have some philosophy to you. What anything that you've been reading lately that you want to share with people that has sparked, thoughts or insights for you?
Sure. I'm going to read from something. This is I think it's 14th century samurai song. It's called The Warrior's Creed. And I have three of these in here. It's a long thing of what I don't have as a warrior. And one is, I have no divine power. I make honesty my divine power. I like that.
I do too.
I have no magic secrets. I make character my magic secret. I have no miracles. I make right action my miracle.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
there's the whole thing. It's called A Warrior's Creed. You can probably find it online. I've made friends with it for a number of decades now because it basically talks about who are you all by yourself,
Yeah.
and what do you do. And the two biggest struggles that I think human beings have is discovering their biases. We have cultural biases that we came in with. I was raised in the logging industry, which is very, very macho. But and this was in Southern Oregon, one of the cultural biases there was rugged individualism.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, that's what I thought life was until I did work my way through college, and I discovered that is an illusion, that we're all codependent and we're interdependent with each other. And even though I can can't tell you how many successful business owners have told me, well, I did it myself. They didn't do it themselves.
No.
They usually had their father or somebody else donate it, but they have to get this. I'm a self-made man. It's
Or
like, no,
all
you're
the
not.
people along the way that helped them.
So
Yeah.
that's one of the illusions that I had growing up,
Yep.
and I had to. I got that. So it's those illusions. I also grew up with the concept I've got nothing coming, because I was raised in a kind of a stark world,
Yep.
and I don't think that anymore. I don't think I have anything coming. I don't think I have nothing coming. I get to be who I am, and I enjoy that. I am unique, like all the rest of us.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and I'm the same. 99.9% of me is the same as everybody else. I have a few thoughts that might diverge,
Yeah.
and observations, and that's. But the rest of it, I get a haircut, I wear clothes, and I make sure that when I'm around people that they're comfortable with my dress and my demeanor, so that they will trust me to tell me who they are and what they're interested in.
Yep.
And that's really important to me. I was teaching parents for a few years, and I absolutely loved that. I got to talk to the people that are really operating the world. They're working and raising children. I mean, that's a basic thing to do in the world. And these people, whether they were on hard luck or not, had so much wisdom about them that I learned a whole lot from all these people.
Yep.
One lady had 7 children from 3 different fathers, and she didn't have much money, and she was in one of my classes, and she was the brightest, best parent I have ever met, and
Yeah.
she was juggling 7 kids. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm thinking there, I don't know any upper echelon person that could do this.
Yeah. It's amazing. Gosh, I know, Michael, you hit on so many things. That's why I love just having these conversations. You've been, a really kind of a rock for me especially the last 2 months. There's certain things that I've been working through, and you kind of been there for me. And I know we were all over the place, on this conversation, but I'll get more focused, and I want to have you back again. But
You better wait till what your listeners think first.
yeah, I'm sure that whether the listeners like it or not, I got a lot out of this. But I don't know. You bring so much to the table, and just the way you look at the world and the way you think about things. I appreciate you. And any closing, parting thoughts you want to leave with anyone?
No, I don't. I don't have anything of that nature. Um, I all I find is that when I spend less time thinking in words, I don't have as many biases.
Yeah.
And unbiased thinking is what I strive for, so that I can see things clearly. And that takes work every day. It's not something that just happens.
Yep. Lean into that for 1 minute. How do you do that?
The way I do it is from some of the old Taoistic notions. They call it state of mind being no knowledge. The way I achieve that for myself, my version of it, is that we have this 2-stage memory process. We have the short-term memory, which is where we put things in our mind for a while and rehearse them, and then figure out what categories they get fixed in, and then we put them in there. Yep, that was a dog, all right. And oh, there's a cat. Put that in those 2 categories. So what I've learned to do is uh, hold stuff in short-term memory until there's nothing happening anymore, and I don't do anything consciously with it. I let my brain sort it out, and when my brain does it, the dog and the cat, they end up in the same categories at the same time. Uh, and then there's times when I have no categorization going on, which is when I have the least bias. Every time we put something in a category in our mind, or good or evil or whatever it happens to be, we're making a judgment. We're having an opinion. I try to stay unopinionated.
Yep.
It's really easy to have an opinion. I try not to do that. Try to hold things, and also the only time there's any information really available is at the moment, like talking with you right now. This is only the moment. The only thing that you and I have together right now is our wit and our character and our ability to communicate. There's no other prop that we can touch.
Yep.
That's it.
So true. Yep. Well, thank you. It's been fun. We'll have to get you back
Okay.
on again soon.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You bet.